Hi everybody, this is Denise Tawwab, back again with another video on the NIST Risk Management Framework. This is coming from NIST Special Publication 837, Rev 2. In this video, we're going to go over the 6 tasks that are in the Assess step of the NIST Risk Management Framework. We'll talk first about the purpose of the Assess step, and then we'll cover each of the 6 individual tasks in turn. Now, these are the steps of the NIST Risk Management Framework. We start at the preparation step, and I have 2 videos on that. And then we categorize, select the controls, implement the controls. And once the controls are implemented, then we do an assessment of the controls. The purpose of the assess step is to determine if the controls that have been selected for implementation are implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired outcome with respect to meeting the security and privacy requirements for the system and for the organization. There are 6 steps. There are 6 tasks in this step. The first task that we're going to talk about is assessor selection. In the assessor selection task, you select the appropriate assessor or assessment team for the type of control assessment to be conducted. And this can happen in your development acquisition phase of the SDLC, in the implementation assessment phase, or for existing systems, this can happen in the operations and maintenance phase of the system development lifecycle. All right, inputs to assessor selection. You need your security, privacy, and supply chain risk management plans, any program management control information, any common control documentation, your organization's security and privacy program plans, your supply chain risk management strategy, the system design documentation, the enterprise security and privacy architecture information, your security, privacy, and supply chain risk management policies and procedures that apply to the system. All of that needs to be the input to selecting an assessor. The expected outputs is going to be the selection of an assessor or an assessment team who is going to be responsible for conducting the control assessments. Now, who's responsible for selecting the assessor? That responsibility falls to the authorizing official or to a designated representative. The support roles come in from your Chief Information Officer, your Chief Information Security Officer, and your Chief Privacy Officer. All right, what kinds of things do we need to consider when we're talking about selecting the assessor? Well, you have to consider both the technical expertise and the level of independence that's required in selecting control assessors. Some organizations may select control assessors prior to the Risk Management Framework assess step to support your control assessments at the earliest opportunity during the system lifecycle. When you identify your assessors early and select them, it gives you time to plan for assessment activities, including agreeing on the scope of the assessment. Organizations implementing a system security engineering approach may also benefit from early selection of assessors to support verification and validation activities that occurred throughout the system lifecycle. Organizations ensure that control assessors possess, first of all, the required skills and technical expertise to develop effective assessment plans and to conduct assessments of program management, system-specific, hybrid, and common controls as the need arises. This includes general knowledge of risk management concepts and approaches, as well as comprehensive knowledge of and experience with the hardware, software, and firmware components that have been implemented. In organizations where the assessment capability is centrally managed, the Senior Agency Information Security Officer may have the responsibility of selecting and managing the security control assessors or assessment teams for organizational systems. As controls may be implemented to achieve security and privacy objectives, organizations will consider the degree of collaboration between security control and privacy control assessors that is necessary. So if you're looking at both security and privacy for the system, say if the system touches PII, then the security and privacy control assessors will likely need to collaborate. Organizations can conduct self-assessments of controls, or they can obtain the services of an independent control assessor. An independent assessor is an individual or a group that can conduct an impartial assessment. Now, impartiality means that assessors are free from any perceived or actual conflicts of interest with respect to the determination of control effectiveness or the development, operation, or management of the system, common controls, or program management controls. So the system owner can't be the assessor. Whoever is going to assess the system has to be impartial and has to basically be an outsider. The authorizing with respect to that system, the authorizing official determines the level of assessor Okay, let me try this sentence again. The authorizing official determines the level of assessor independence based on applicable laws, executive orders, directives, policies, regulations, or standards. The authorizing official consults with the Office of the Inspector General, Chief Information Officer, Senior Agency Official for Privacy, and the Senior Agency Information Security Officer to help guide and inform decisions regarding assessor independence. The System Privacy Officer is going to be responsible for identifying assessment methodologies and metrics to determine if the privacy controls are implemented correctly, operating as intended, and sufficient to ensure compliance with privacy requirements and manage privacy risk. The Chief Privacy Officer, or in the federal government, the Senior Agency Official for Privacy, is responsible for conducting assessments of privacy controls and documenting the results of the assessments. In keeping with OMB A130, Circular A130, an independent evaluation of privacy programs and practices is not required. So with respect to privacy, the assessor does not have to be independent. However, an organization may choose to employ independent privacy assessments at its own discretion. In all cases, the Chief Privacy Officer is going to be responsible and accountable for the organization's privacy program, including any privacy functions performed by independent assessments. The Senior Agency Official for Privacy is responsible for providing privacy information to the authorizing official. So privacy sits apart from security, but in both cases, somebody is responsible and somebody will be held accountable for how that assessment plays out. All right, that's task A1, assessor selection. The next task in the assess step of the risk management framework is task A2, the assessment plan. In this task, you develop, review, and approve plans to assess implemented controls. This can happen at the development acquisition phase for a new system, also at the implementation assessment phase. And for existing systems, task A2 will be happening at the operations maintenance phase. All right, inputs to your assessment plan. Potential inputs can be your security, privacy, and supply chain risk management plans, program management control information, common control documentation, security and privacy program plans for the organization, your supply chain risk management strategy, system design documentation, supply chain information, your enterprise security and privacy architecture information, and security, privacy, and supply chain risk management policies and procedures that apply to the system. The expected output from task A2 is a security and privacy assessment plan, or separate security and privacy assessment plans, depending on how your organization wants to do it, approved by the authorizing official. Okay, who's responsible for the assessment plan? The authorizing official, and also the control assessor. Of course, supporting roles can be played by the Chief Information Security Officer, the Chief Privacy Officer, the system owner, common control provider, the information owners or stewards, the system security officer, as well as the system privacy officer. Again, that depends on the structure of your organization, how large your team, your security staff is, as to how the work is spread out, but the task itself has to be done. All right, things to think about with your assessment plan. Control assessors develop security and privacy assessment plans based on the implementation information contained in the security privacy plans that you give them, the program management control documentation, and the common control documentation. So you're going to give that information to the assessors, and using that information and some other things, they will create your security and privacy assessment plans. Assessment plans will reflect the type of assessment being conducted. For example, developmental testing and evaluation, independent verification and validation, audits, including supply chain, assessments that support system and common control authorization or reauthorization. You can have program management control assessments. These are all the different types of assessments. Your continuous monitoring assessments, and assessments conducted after you take some sort of remediation action. Your organization may choose to develop a single integrated security and privacy assessment plan for the system or the organization. An integrated assessment plan does the following. It delineates roles and responsibilities for control assessment. It provides the objectives for the control assessments, and it provides the specific assessment procedures for each control. The authorizing official reviews and approves assessment plans to ensure the following: that the plans are consistent with the security and privacy objectives of your organization, that the plans employ procedures, methods, techniques, tools, and automation to support continuous monitoring and near real-time risk management. Also, the authorizing official is looking at the assessment plans to ensure that they are cost effective, that they establish expectations for the control assessments and for the level of effort for the assessment, and that the assessment plans help to ensure that appropriate resources are applied toward determining control effectiveness while providing the necessary level of assurance in making such determinations. So the AO is going to look very closely at the assessment plans. When controls are provided by an external provider via contracts, interagency agreements, lines of business arrangements, licensing agreements, or supply chain agreements, then the organization can request security and privacy assessment plans and assessment results or evidence from the external provider. And that's task A2, the assessment plan. The third task in the assessment step of the risk management framework is task A3, control assessments. In the control assessment step, the assessor will assess the controls in accordance with the assessment procedures described in the assessment plans. The inputs to control assessments will be your security and privacy assessment plans, your security and privacy plans, external assessment or audit results, if applicable. Let's say you have an external provider and you have to pull in those results. That will also be an input to the control assessments task. The expected output from this task is going to be completed control assessments and associated assessment evidence. The primary responsibility for your control assessments is going to be the control assessor. Supporting roles will be the authorizing official, system owner, common control provider, the information owner, the chief information security officer, the chief privacy officer, and the system security and privacy officers. All right, let's talk about some considerations for your control assessments. And I have 7 slides here, so hang on, guys, we'll get through it. Control assessments determine the extent to which the selected controls are, let's say it together, implemented correctly, operating as intended, and producing the desired outcome with respect to meeting security and privacy requirements. That's what you're doing when you do a control assessment. The assessor findings are a factual reporting of whether the controls are operating as intended and whether any deficiencies in the controls are discovered during the assessment. Are they working right, and did you find any deficiencies? Assessors assess implemented controls using the procedures specified in the assessment plans, and they make recommendations on how to respond to control deficiencies to reduce or to eliminate identified vulnerabilities or unacceptable risk. The senior agency official for privacy conducts an initial assessment of the privacy controls prior to system operation and assesses those controls periodically thereafter to ensure compliance with privacy requirements and to manage privacy risk. Controls implemented to achieve both security and privacy objectives may require that the security and privacy control assessors collaborate. Only deficiencies in controls that can be exploited by threat agencies are considered vulnerabilities. Okay, so keep that in mind. Many deficiencies may be found, but only the deficiencies that can be exploited by threat agents are the ones that will be considered vulnerabilities. Control assessments occur as early as possible in the system development lifecycle, preferably during the development phase. Again, we're trying to bake security in. We're trying to make sure that it's coming in from the beginning, because the longer you wait, the further in the cycle you go, the costlier this becomes and the more chances you have to miss something. These types of assessments are referred to, and these are early assessments, are referred to as developmental testing and evaluation, and they validate that the controls are implemented correctly and are consistent with the established information security and privacy architectures. Developmental testing and evaluation activities include design and code reviews, regression testing, and application scanning. Deficiencies that are identified early in the life cycle can be resolved in a more cost-efficient, effective manner. Assessments may be needed prior to source selection during the procurement process to assess potential suppliers or providers before your organization enters into agreements or contracts during the development phase. The results of control assessments conducted early in the system development lifecycle can also be used consistent with reuse criteria established by your organization. The assessments can also be used during the authorization process to avoid unnecessary delays or costly repetition of assessments. Organizations can maximize the use of automation to conduct control assessments to increase the speed, effectiveness, and efficiency of the assessments, and to support continuous monitoring of the security and privacy posture of the organization's systems. I'm still talking about considerations during the control assessments task. Applying and assessing controls throughout the development process may be appropriate for iterative development processes. When iterative development processes, I'm talking about agile, are implied, then an iterative assessment may be conducted as each cycle is completed. A similar process is used for assessing controls in commercial IT products that are used in the system. Organizations may choose to begin assessing controls prior to the complete implementation of all controls in the security and privacy plans. What I mean is you don't have to have all the controls implemented before you start assessing the controls. This type of incremental assessment is appropriate if it is more efficient or cost-effective to do so. Common controls, of course, are assessed separately and need not be assessed as part of a system-level assessment. Your common controls are going to be assessed by the common control provider. That's something that happens independent of you, and you can pull in the assessment results from the common control provider. But as part of your system level assessment, common controls will be addressed separately. You want to ensure that your assessors have access to everything needed to assess the controls. The information system, the environment where the controls are implemented, any documentation, records, artifacts, test results, all of it. This includes the controls implemented by external providers through contracts and other agreements. Assessor independence, as determined by the authorizing official during the continuous monitoring process, facilitates reuse of assessment results to support ongoing authorization and reauthorization. Assessor independence, that is key. Organizations establish reasonable and appropriate criteria for reusing assessment results as part of the organization-wide assessment policy or in the Security and Privacy Program Plan. And finally, for Task A3, reuse of assessments, that is, makes the risk management process more efficient and cost-effective. Assessment results may be reused in the following situations. 1. Assessment results from external programs that test and evaluate security and privacy features of commercial IT products. And that would be Common Criteria Evaluation and Validation, your NIST Crypto Module Validation Program. If prior assessment results from the system developer or vendor are available, the control assessor may incorporate those results into the assessment. The third case where reuse might be appropriate is if a control implementation was assessed during other forms of assessment at previous stages of the system development lifecycle, for example, unit testing, functional testing, and or acceptance testing. To support reciprocity, for example, assessment results supporting an authorization to use. So when you can reuse your assessment there. You can take a look at 853, NIST Special Publication 853, for additional information on assessment result reuse if that is of interest to you. So that's Task A3, your control assessments. Next up is Task A4, and this is the fourth task in the assess step of the NIST Risk Management Framework, is your assessment reports. In the assessment reports task, we prepare the assessment reports, documenting the findings and recommendations from the control assessments. Potential inputs to your assessment reports will be the completed control assessments and any associated assessment evidence. The expected output from this task will be completed security and privacy assessment reports that detail the assessor findings and recommendations. Now, who's responsible for putting together the assessment reports? Well, the control assessor. Supporting roles can be the system owner, common control provider, the system security officer, and the system privacy officer, which means they may get information or input, but the assessor, the independent assessor, is the person who puts together the assessment reports. All right. With respect to assessment reports, the purpose of the security assessment report, control assessors document the results of the security and privacy control assessments in a security assessment report. The SAR includes information needed to determine the effectiveness of the controls implemented within or inherited by the information system. Assessment reports are key documents in the system or common control authorization package that is sent to the authorizing official. So your security assessment report is one of the documents that is included in the authorization package. Assessment reports are important in determining risk. Your organization may develop a single integrated security and privacy assessment report. So the types of control assessments will determine the format and detail. The format and level of detail provided in the security assessment report may be prescribed by the organization and is appropriate for the type of control assessment conducted, whether that be developmental testing and evaluation, independent verification and validation, self-assessments, assessment after remediation actions, independent evaluations or audits, and assessments during continuous monitoring. So let's talk about interim reports and the executive summary. We're still talking about Task A4, assessment reports. Your control assessment results obtained during the system development lifecycle are documented in an interim report and included in the final security and privacy assessment reports. Developing interim reports that document assessment results from relevant phases of the SDLC reinforces the concept that security assessment reports are evolving documents. Interim reports are used as appropriate to inform the final assessment report. An executive summary is developed from the control assessment findings. The executive summary provides the authorizing officials and others an abbreviated version of the security assessment report that includes a synopsis of the assessment findings and the recommendations for addressing control deficiencies. And that's task A4 of the assess step of the risk management framework, assessment reports. The next task, and we just have 2 more, so hang in there with me, guys. The next task is remediation actions. In the remediation actions task, you conduct initial remediation actions on the controls and reassess the remediated controls. Potential inputs to remediation actions is completed security and privacy assessment reports with findings and recommendations, the security and privacy plans, the security and privacy assessment plans, the organization and system level risk assessment results. Now, the expected outputs from remediation actions, any remediation actions that you have to take after the initial assessment, the outputs are completed initial remediation actions based on the security and privacy assessment reports, changes to implementations reassessed by the assessment team, updated security and privacy assessment reports, updated security and privacy plans, including changes to the control implementations. Now, who's responsible for remediation actions? Primary responsibility for remediation actions includes the system owner, the common control provider, and the control assessor. All right, things to think about with respect to remediation actions. The security assessment report and the privacy assessment reports describe deficiencies in the controls that could not be resolved during the development of the system or that are discovered post-development. Control deficiencies may result in security and privacy risk, including supply chain risk. The assessment findings provide information that facilitates risk responses based on the organization's risk tolerance and priorities. The authorizing official may determine that certain findings represent significant unacceptable risk, and he or she may require immediate remediation actions. It may be possible to conduct initial remediation actions for deficiencies that can be quickly and easily remediated with existing resources. If initial remediation actions are taken, assessors reassess the affected controls and they update the assessment reports with the findings from the reassessment, but they do not change the original assessment results. The history remains. The documentation does not get changed. You just reassess. The security and privacy plans are updated based on the assessments and any remediation actions taken. Remember, your security and privacy plans must reflect the latest implementation information. The updated plans reflect the state of the controls after the initial assessment and any modifications by the system owner or common control provider in addressing recommendations for corrective actions. At the completion of the control assessments, security and privacy plans will contain an accurate description of the implemented controls. So when all is said and done, again, your security and privacy plans will reflect the controls as implemented. Now, with respect to remediation actions, organizations may prepare an addendum to the security privacy assessment reports to respond to initial assessment findings. The addendum may include information about initial remediation actions taken by system owners or common control providers in response to assessor findings. The addendum may provide the system owner or common control provider perspective on the findings. The addendum may provide additional explanatory material rebutting certain findings and correcting the record. The addendum does not change or influence the initial assessor findings provided in the reports. So no matter what's in the organization's addendum, the initial assessor findings will remain documented in the report. Addendum information is considered by the authorizing official when making risk-based authorization decisions. Okay, the issue resolution process. Still talking about Task A5, remediation actions. Your organization may implement a process to determine the initial actions to take regarding the control deficiencies that have been identified during the assessment. The process can address vulnerabilities and risk, false positives, and other factors that provide useful information to authorizing officials about the security and privacy posture of the system and organization, including the ongoing effectiveness of system-specific, hybrid, and common controls. The issue resolution process can also ensure that only substantive items are identified and transferred to the plan of actions and milestone. Still talking about remediation actions, risk assessments. Findings from a system-level control assessment may require an update to the system risk assessment and also to the organizational risk assessment. Risk assessments are conducted as needed at the organization level, the mission business process level, and at the system level throughout the system development lifecycle. And these assessments happen during the preparation steps, specifically Task P3 and Task P14. The updated risk assessments and any inputs from the senior agency official, risk management, or risk executive function determines the initial remediation actions and the prioritization of those actions. So the updated risk assessments determine the remediation actions and how those actions are prioritized. System owners and common control providers may decide, based on a system or an organizational risk assessment, that certain findings are inconsequential and present no significant security or privacy risk. Such findings are retained in the security and privacy assessment reports and also monitored during the monitoring step that we'll get to later. The authorizing official is responsible for reviewing and understanding the assessor findings and for accepting the security and privacy risk, including supply chain risk, that result from the operation of the system or from the use of common controls. Okay, senior leadership involvement in the mitigation process. Still talking about Task A5, remediation actions. Your organization will review assessor findings to determine the significance of the findings and whether the findings warrant any further investigation or remediation. Senior leadership involvement in the mitigation process is necessary to ensure that resources are effectively allocated in keeping with organizational priorities. Let me say that again. Senior leadership involvement in the mitigation process is necessary to ensure that resources are effectively allocated in keeping with the organization's priorities. Resources are first provided to the systems that are supporting the most critical mission and business functions or to correcting efficiencies that pose the greatest risk. And that's Task A5, remediation actions. We are down to the last task in the assess step of the risk management framework, and that task is your plan of action and milestones. In Task A6, plan of action and milestones, we prepare the plan of action and milestones based on the findings and recommendations of the assessment reports. Potential inputs to your POAMs is going to be updated security and privacy assessment reports, updated security and privacy plans, organization and system level risk assessment reports, and the risk management strategy and risk tolerance. The expected outputs would be a plan of action and milestones detailing the findings from the security and privacy assessment reports that are to be remediated. Primary responsibility for the plan of action and milestones, or the POAM, is going to be the system owner and the common control provider. Supporting roles, of course, can be played by the information owners or stewards, system security officer, system privacy officer, chief information security officer, the chief privacy officer, the control assessor, and or the chief acquisition officer, depending on the system and the roles in your organization. Okay, the POAM is included as part of your authorization package for the system. The POAM describes the actions that are planned to correct deficiencies in the controls that were identified during the assessment of the controls and or during continuous monitoring. The POAM includes tasks to be accomplished with the recommendation for completion before or after system authorization, the resources required to accomplish the task, the milestones that have been established to meet the task, and also the scheduled completion dates for the milestones and tasks in the POAM. The POAM is reviewed by the authorizing official to ensure that there is agreement with the remediation actions planned to correct the identified deficiencies. The POAM is then used to monitor progress in completing the actions. Deficiencies are accepted by the authorizing official as residual risk, or they are remediated during the assessment or prior to submission of the authorization package to the authorizing official. So if there are deficiencies, the authorizing official either accepts those deficiencies as residual risk, or the deficiencies are remediated during the assessment or prior to submission of the authorization package to the authorizing official. POAM entries are not necessary when deficiencies are accepted by the AO as residual risk. Ooh, what was that? However, deficiencies identified during assessment and monitoring are documented in the assessment reports, which can be retained within an automated security privacy management and reporting tool to maintain an effective audit trail. The audit trail with respect to your assessments is very important, and every effort should be made to document and retain documentation of every decision that happens along the way. Your POAMs are developed by the organization based on assessment results obtained from control assessments, audits, and continuous monitoring, and in keeping with any laws, executive orders, policies, regulations, standards, or guidance that apply to the system or to your organization. You implement a consistent process for developing POAMs that use a prioritized approach to risk integration that is uniform across your organization. A risk assessment guides the prioritization process in the POAM. The process ensures that POAMs are informed by the security categorization of the system. Is it a low, moderate, or high system? Security, privacy, and supply chain risk assessments, the specific deficiencies in the controls, the criticality of the identified control deficiencies, and the proposed risk mitigation approach to address the identified deficiencies in the controls. Risk mitigation resources include, for example, personnel, new hardware or software, and any tools. And that is task A6, your plan of action and milestones. Of course, there are other documents that drill down into more detail on exactly what those documents should look like. But we're done. Those are the 6 assess tasks in the six tasks in the assess step of the NIST Risk Management Framework. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. I appreciate your time and attention. I know you could be doing other things. I hope this adds value to your life. Feel free to like, subscribe, and comment so we can have a conversation, and I'll see you on the next video.